Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for this event, and I am so very excited to be here and to moderate this panel discussion that we have going on. But before we get started, we do have some housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the discussion, you will have the opportunity to access it later. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience, so if at any time during today's discussion you have a question for any of our panelists or all of us, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use the question and answer tab on your interface and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can during the discussion. We also have a very, very, very interactive chat feature, and I do encourage you to please be as interactive as you want to be with this esteemed panel of experts here. Please feel free to chat us with your questions, comments, suggestions, whatever you want to share with us. Please do so, and we will hopefully incorporate it into our discussion. And then finally, at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you will be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off this great webinar. I'm so very much looking forward to it. It's called The State of DevSecOps, People, Process, and Technology. This is a panel discussion about some of the hindrances and roadblocks to DevSecOps adoption within organizations and some of the issues that they're facing as they journey toward DevSecOps. So our panelists today are all very, very adept at the topic and have lots of information they want to share with us. And let me introduce our panelists today. First of all, we have JT Perry, who is the member of the Tanzu Value Advisory Team over at VMware. JT, thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
Then we have Daniela Pontes, who is the Security Product Marketing Manager over at Sysdig. Daniela, thank you for being here.
Thank you, too. Hi, everyone.
Then we have Jeffrey Keyes, who is the VP of Product Marketing Strategy over at Platora. Jeffrey, thanks for being here. And then we have Matt Fraunhofer, who is the Solution Architect at X Matters, which is an Everbridge company. Matt, thank you very much for being a part of this.
Hello, hello.
Then we have Barak Chaster, who is the Senior Director and Chief Architect over at Bridge Crew. Barak, thank you for dialing in all the way from Israel. Appreciate your being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And last but certainly not least, we have Curtis Barker, who is the VP of Product Strategy and Field CTO over at Resilion. Curtis, thank you for being a part of this panel. I do appreciate it.
Pleased to be with you.
Great. So as I said, this panel discussion is all about DevSecOps, and we all know that organizations really do need to secure their applications from development to production and release. It's never been more critical, but issues really do hinder a lot of organizations in their adoption of DevSecOps. Even as application security is top of mind for so many organizations. So in this webinar, we are going to take a look at some of the things that are kind of standing in the way and hopefully offer some sage advice to organizations that are looking to get past their hurdles. So I wanted to first of all, want to kind of set the stage for DevSecOps and kind of understand where we are in the process, because obviously us in the industry, as much as we talk about DevSecOps, we kind of assume that everybody's already doing it. But you talk to a lot of organizations, and there are, I think, more organizations that have not adopted DevSecOps than have. And so we're still very early in the DevSecOps adoption process, if you will. So let's start at the beginning then. Let's take a look at, or take the pulse, if you will, and kind of get the lay of the land with respect for DevSecOps adoption. Jeff, why don't you get us started with this conversation? Where are we with DevSecOps today?
Well, that's a great question, and it largely depends on who you are and where you come from and what your development style to begin with. the majority of our customers are large enterprise IT, which means we run the gamut because they've got so much legacy that, they're not able to react as quickly as others. But in essence, what we see is that most companies are trying to figure out if they're doing a good job or not. They're partway in the journey of DevOps. They're in the improving their overall DevOps and agile capabilities themselves. But on top of that, they're also dealing with a changing landscape, a transition from project orientation to product, various tooling, open source implications. There's almost always some kind of management push of, we've got to do better, and what are we doing better, and prove to me that we're doing better, because there's no end of the latest hack or infiltration that's happening. On top of it, not only are there pressures to deliver more software faster and deliver or improve the efficiency of the overall software factory, but from a security point of view, in their DevSecOps journey, they're trying to understand what the implications are, not only to the application, but to the infrastructure and to the pipelines as well. And so evaluating that as part of are we doing a good job? Are we making progress? And cross-referencing that against the blast radius of any, found kind of threat, and how to incorporate that all into the pipeline. So to say the least, trying to understand where we are, and we're doing pretty well in some areas and not sure if we're doing well in the other, that's probably the lay of the land of where most people sit.
I'd say there's probably a large number of people that are also trying to define it, right? As we move, I would say, out of the world of the buzzword into where it's starting to coalesce around some meaning, right? The edges are still really fuzzy, and even right here, we could probably come up with 6 definitions around the edges. But I think now that there's starting to be kind of a, what are we really trying to accomplish? Now people are starting to take the action. So therefore, they're kind of still in the beginning of the, moving from talking to doing.
And to double the challenge, even DevOps, the agile culture is not mature yet. It didn't reach the maturity. And now we add a new ingredient, but there is no other option, yeah? Like what COVID did to moving to the cloud, everybody needs to keep up with the pace of threats that are, showing up every day. So that third ingredient needs to be there to be with the same agility that everything else is moving with this new cloud environment.
Yeah, I have a slightly, maybe different point of view in that I don't think anyone's planning to get to a destination. It's very much a journey. I speak to companies all the time, and within those organizations, there are generally different practices, and those practices are frankly valid based upon the tech stack that those teams are working on. But they're working to adopt what they believe are DevSecOps practices, and I agree with JT. That can be defined any one number of ways. But what's clear to see is companies that are on that journey, they are basically performing better. I think there's a number of studies that said 50% of companies have DevSecOps practices in place. And what you see for the companies that do have DevSecOps practices in place, they generally scan more, and they have scanning at different intervals across the software delivery lifecycle. And the implications of that is that they find flaws, and they find them earlier. And if you find flaws earlier, there's a lot of energy around fixing flaws as soon as you find them. And that, if you do frequently, will avoid things like a technical debt buildup, which crushes engineering teams over time.
Interesting point. And so, Barack, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think that the way that I look at it as a process within a company, a lot of the people that I talk with are using DevSecOps as the productivity answer to security teams. A lot of times security teams might be the bottleneck, or you might have an approval process before delivering an application to production. If you take the practices the security teams are mandating and push them back to developers and DevOps engineers, you can decentralize that process and give more power to the developers, essentially.
All right. Go ahead.
I was just go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jeffrey.
I was just going to glom onto that. That's exactly right. The journey we go through in our world is to say, start where you are, learn from those pipelines that are doing well, those teams that are doing well, and then basically take those best practices and stop inspecting security, when you're done and seeing how you do. Not that a hardening phase is bad, but start building this in as part of the process rather than, waiting to the end where you're introducing more instability by fixing stuff. Which is precisely your point, Curtis. It's like, man, the more you can test, the more you can do it earlier on. Look at how much you're actually investing into security as from a time and resource perspective. All those things are really good.
Yeah, the only other thing that I'd add to that is just I think with a lot of companies, DevSecOps has been this nirvana that's supposed to fix everything, and then you've got there's a lot of executives out there that have gotten this impression of what DevSecOps is, and they think, well, we're just going to achieve that, and then once we've achieved it, it stops. Mm-hmm. DevSecOps is really about a journey, and so it's how do we adjust the executive level presentation and the executive level assumptions that, well, as soon as we can stop funding this once we achieve X, Y, and Z. No, there's so much more that we need to do, and you are going to have to do it to keep up the momentum and keep being proactive and frankly even reactive in some cases to all these security threats coming our way.
Exactly. And it's both, shifting left as far as you can, to introduce security as part of the development, but continue all the way to the right, in a continuous loop, checking back, because it's the word in cloud environment and threat environment is continuous change. So you have to really integrate everything. Security needs to go inside of development, but development and ops also needs to come towards security. So and that's an integration of the processes and the life cycle and also the journey, as Curtis said.
Danielle, I think you're hitting right on it. Right, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, especially Matt talking about executives. When I was CIO at Primera, would run into this, trying to move them out of a project mindset, yet they want to fund a project to do it, right? And so they think there's an end date, because that's frankly what we've taught them over the past how many ever years of doing software development, right? Is that moving out of that waterfall method.
Yeah, it's a project. It's not a project, it's a process, right? It's an ongoing thing. It's like digital transformation and just DevOps itself. And Jeff didn't mean to step over you there. So, but gave you a chance to get some water. So there you go.
The only other thing I would add is just executives also need to realize that DevSecOps is not, again, like has been said, it's not a project. It's a brand new culture. It's a brand new way of actually operating your business. If you really want it to be effective, it's so much more than just the low-level CI/CD pipelines. And once we automate everything, we're doing DevSecOps. Yeah, you're doing a part of it, but there's so much more benefit that you can get out of it.
It needs to be embraced. A culture is embraced, yeah. So in every levels of decision and every process that you put in place, you keep security as part of it.
And that is a great seg for the next question, which is, we talk about, all the things, where we are today with DevSecOps, where organizations are, and we're just kind of naturally kind of like going into that culture conversation. It seems to me that culture is one of the biggest roadblocks to DevSecOps adoption that an organization can face. And I wonder why that is. And do you guys think that DevOps and DevSecOps, the culture around DevOps, to me, it seems like it should easily embrace DevSecOps, but doesn't really seem to be the case within a lot of organizations. So why do you guys think that the culture continues to be such an issue with respect to DevSecOps? And JT, I want to throw this over to you first.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just comes back with history, right? We've spent years and years saying security was that thing you did at the end. They were the ones that you went and asked for permission. Can I take this to production, right? And we worked for so many years to get those requirements up front, but then, you know what, security go off in the corner. I'm going to go do my dev and infra build, and then I'm going to come check with you at the end. And it's frankly no different than what we were trying to take on with the dev and ops and getting application development and what we used to call infrastructure to talk together. Cultural change is hard and it takes time. No different than building a house with a bunch of little rooms, and then you decide you want to remodel it and have a great room concept, and you're going to live there while you do that, right? It's messy, it takes time and changes, and you do a little bit at a time. And so it's all of that. And then, lastly, security, that organization itself looking at how to do things differently, right? It's not how do I implement the same control I had in this new CI/CD world. It's no. How do I leverage CI/CD to accomplish that same security objective I was trying to accomplish with that old objective? So it's all of that, over time. It's hard. Changing the technology is easy, air quotes. Changing people is takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of time.
Yeah, I would add on to that. I'd completely agree in that, there's a lot of historical context to this discussion. But if you think about the innovations in the development sphere, as we talk about automation, developers have innovated a way to create huge automation as part of the development lifecycle, which has allowed them to move at much greater velocity. And security teams, frankly, haven't been able to keep up with that speed and have quickly become a bottleneck. And as that bottleneck grows, there's long-standing tension between the developer, therefore, and security teams. DevOps want to write code and push new products to innovate and stay competitive. Security teams want to ensure applications are secure and unexploitable so that their organization can stay safe. These two desires often collide as DevOps wants to keep moving and security teams are often seen as a bottleneck to their progress. This friction and disparate goals can lead to a lack of collaboration and actually distrust between those teams, which can be a hindrance to adoption.
I would also just throw out there that organization's culture has to come and be embraced from the entire organization. So we can have as much safety as we want across the different teams when everything goes well, but the organization, to fully embrace DevSecOps, they need to also be comfortable that leaders usually have some sort of agenda that they are trying to achieve. And if the organization's culture is, say there's a security breach of some type, and they know that if there's this breach and I'm ultimately responsible, I'm the CISO and I am ultimately responsible and I'm going to get fired, if they're constantly under that fear, then they're not going to be willing to let go of that security process and try new and innovative things. They want as much control over that because their head's on the chopping block. Sorry if nobody likes that analogy, but they're the one ultimately going to be held responsible when something goes wrong, and they're not going to be willing to share that responsibility. And frankly, other leaders may not be willing to accept it.
A lot of it's right. The fallacy of I haven't been breached yet that I know of, and so what I'm doing now must be working. So I'm not going to change what I'm doing, right? And that's it's a dangerous place to be, frankly, but it's super common.
Exactly. Dwell time, it's still like in months, so a lot of companies don't even know that they have been breached. So the worst thing is when in the news.
Yeah, that's the worst time to find out, or the worst way to find out you've been breached. It's like, oh, wow, I'm on NPR this morning. Gosh, wasn't planning for that one. But yeah, But Matt, to your point, there's this fear that surrounds security. I think within many organizations, both with the organization itself in putting out applications or somehow opening themselves up to a data breach, but also the folks who are quote unquote in charge of security. And so I wonder if the culture of an organization, when we're talking about encouraging a more kind of shift left approach to application development and security, if do you think that we have to kind of like start from scratch, like break down cybersecurity and the silos in an organization and really start, build things up from scratch to get to that culture where dev and sec and ops are all kind of in the same room working together, or is it something that can be overcome?
I mean, personally, I think it can be overcome from the sheer fact that I don't feel like an organization, especially large organizations, they don't have another choice, right? You can't just tear apart the ship and rebuild it while you still have a ship to sail on, if that works. I have to be able to ultimately rebuild the ship as I'm sailing it. And so does that mean I can get rid of every piece of silo in my organization? Not necessarily, but at the same time, I think there's definitely a lot more that can be done than most organizations are apt to do in terms of making things more open.
I think okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say a common practice I've seen that's been effective has been at the beginning of a cycle, not the end during a hardening phase when it's harder to make changes, but to start with some kind of threat modeling where you do discuss the applications, you discuss the infrastructure and the pipeline, since everything's going code and has this ability to be attacked. It serves the purpose of getting the team on board with what's where. From an executive standpoint, oftentimes security feels like the bottomless pit. It's like buying a new air conditioner. You already had one, it worked, and now you're buying a new one, and what do you show for it? Or something else that may seem hidden in the machinery. And yet, it's great to say, well, it does so much better than it did before, but really, can you really tell? The threat modeling, I think, highlights that. And at the start of iterations or just at periodic times, to focus on those areas gives the opportunity for a cross-functional set of folks to look at it and to give some feedback, and then show that investments are being made each iteration to continuously improve. And with the culture being, we're just going to continuously make investments and do a little bit better than we did last time, and have that be the methodology is a way to kind of get around some of the cultural issues that you've got today.
So making it a gradual approach then. Building on it.
Build that trust, right?
Build that trust. And the hidden thing that it's not visible but should be part of core pillars in the DevSecOps is security. We have speed and we have quality checkpoints, and no way this goes in production with this top issue or bug, but security, it's like something that is not there yet. The threat is a potential, and it's different from the usual QA that is done, that is there. You prove that the thing can really counter to reduce the value of the what you are delivering. So understanding that security is part of the quality of what you put out, it's very important.
I think as well, a lot of organizations are at different stages on the journey, and having DevSecOps people within the organization that drive that practice and can understand how to decouple different responsibilities within different teams. I think the thinking some time back was that everyone was going to sit harmoniously in the same room and get this work done. But realistically, and especially in a pandemic when we are literally remote, it's very difficult to do that. So you're relying on a process that keeps people aligned and allows them to do their job indivisibly, but follow one objective from a security operations and development perspective. And there's enough data now with DevOps to show that DevOps teams properly integrate automated security tools almost 2 times more than immature development practices, according to research. And I think the holy grail is a deployment pipeline that minimizes the need for manual effort, but takes into consideration security outcomes and policies and best practices. And there are a number of different actions you can take there. There's been a recent directive from the federal government around a software bill of materials. That's going to help to establish trust and provenance within the code base that you have. And then that's something that will help drive risk transparency across the supply chain, not just within the organization, but from where you get the code. And we all know that developers are increasingly using third-party code to make up the stack that they build on. So things like that will help.
That's a great point.
Sorry,
Go
I think that
ahead,
one of the things that we can get encouraged by is the fact that it kind of happened in the past in another department, the QA department. You had full QA teams getting out at the end of the process, testing your environment, and then approving deployment to production. And now every developer is writing unit tests, integration tests, and test the code before it's being shipped. So a similar process, and it succeeded. We can now run tests as part of our DevOps pipeline. The shift left movement of security is trying to do the same. Instead of doing pen tests at the end or auditor reviews in the end, bring a lot of those processes the same way QA did and scatter those across the different engineering teams. So if we succeeded in the past, we might as well try again.
And they need to understand also that one of the reasons that speed got so much, higher than before is exactly because they are using third-party code. For open source, it's like the basis of cloud native now. And this opens up a lot of questions, security questions. So it's give and take. Yes, you're going to be more agile by using this tech that is, outsourced, but you need to be conscious that this needs to be checked. You don't want to create, entry points for vulnerabilities or bugs or threat attack surfaces.
Danielle, I think that's right. Talking to customers and stuff we work with, and even what we saw in my own past experiences, you also save so much time and frustration. Either, the application or infra folks doing things that they thought they needed to do that they don't need to do, or not using that time to focus on securing vulnerabilities or configuring things or putting things in place that they needed to do. Right? Just like moving to truly that product-driven mindset, you find out you kill so many ideas early. It's the same thing in this DevSecOps world, right? You turn off things. Nope, that didn't work. Let's get there. As opposed to the old days of getting to the end and then going through this security review, and such a waste of time and loops and redoing and frustration.
I think one of the things that we need to do to get better with some of these cultural issues is really improving how we IT individuals, how we communicate back to the business, because ultimately those executives know that they need the applications and they can't afford a security breach, but they don't really understand how we're going to achieve that. And so when we go and ask for $100,000 to go buy a new code scanning piece of software, they don't necessarily know that's going to solve it. We need to come up with ways of visualizing, here's how our systems are architected. Here are the different layers of protection that we are putting in or what we're missing, and give them some sort of analogy of to something more tangible that they can understand. But
The business
oftentimes
value, yeah.
we
This
don't do a good job.
this truly drives revenue, right?
Right.
Their user experience, think about all the time we do of designing and accessibility and all those things that are so critical. Well, there's also this trust value, right? Was a disability outsourcer back for large other insurance companies, right? Showing the ability to respond to security issues quickly, being able to add features from a security perspective very quickly as new technologies, new ideas came to light, was just as critical, and that helps you get ahead of your competitors. I mean, there's a huge competitive advantage to embracing this, in addition to the awesome feeling more secure and more confident in your own posture.
Good point. I can't believe it. We're already like half past the hour. So, and we've got lots more to cover. And we've actually already started kind of talking about the process conversation. What are some of the process issues that are hindering DevSecOps adoption? And there's great stuff so far. And I also want to let Gaurav know, I see his question, and I do want to address it as we're talking about process. So, but first, I kind of want to throw it over to Matt, because he's kind of gotten the ball rolling on the process conversation. So, beyond, I guess maybe starting from scratch and starting all over again, what can an organization, what are some of the things that an organization can do to maybe even recognize first of all what is wrong with their process, or what's going wrong with their process now that's kind of being that roadblock, if you will, to DevSecOps adoption?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. One of the things that I have done for customers, as well as just even being a participant of, is doing an entire end-to-end value stream analysis of starting at the very beginning, where the business has an idea of what they want to sell, or how what they define as value to the customer, and then going through the entire delivery process to the point where the value is actually being realized and an end user is getting the value out of that. Having that process understood, and seeing and visualizing how many different groups and teams are part of that process, and then figuring out how to streamline that, is ultimately one of the best things an organization can do, though hardly any organization actually puts the time and energy into actually doing that. And it's better to do it if you can get somebody outside your organization to facilitate it, because oftentimes we all have hidden biases. And so if I'm working at the same organization that and trying to facilitate this, I've got an idea how the process goes, and I am more apt, no matter how hard I try, I am more apt to confirmation bias and trying to prove that what I think, at least subconsciously, is the process. I'm going to try to find proof that is the process. And so we need to have...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, please continue. I thought you'd start.
No, I think that is one of the biggest underrated things that we can do, and part of the issue around why we can't seem to get all of the different teams aligned as easily as we should.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to Matt's point, and I'm not sure, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, Matt, here, but what I've seen some successful companies do to get out of that confirmation bias is to actually bring in third parties that will help them measure their own maturity, because it's hard when you're in the fishbowl to understand what the maturity is within your sphere. Having someone else that has an understanding of a maturity life cycle when it comes to kind of modern security practices, and has been able to benchmark other organizations and can give you a view of, one, where your maturity is, and two, where you could get started and tangible things that you can do to move forward, I think is massively helpful. And I think it's helpful, frankly, to executives and teams as well, because they can, make decisions that through advice from these third parties that frankly may rub across against the grain a little bit, and sometimes that's needed to make progress. I mean, what we can all see is that breaches cost lots of money to organizations. I think the average breach costs over 3 million. So that should be a motivating factor to bring in people that can help organizations make a start down the path to help them establish these practices. There's just so much data now to suggest that they're going to improve and move the needle in terms of reducing risk. And in the end, that's what I see as a CISO's core job, what they want to do. They want to reduce risk. There's a bunch of goals and metrics tied to that, but reducing security risk is their job. And 3 million plus per breach, I think, is motivation enough to get the budget to do it.
Security also involves multiple domain knowledge. We talked about, application, the code development, and getting to a production in a safe way. But you need to understand also cloud architecture, cloud mechanism and constructs that will be built together with that application environment. You need to understand, the operation and response workflow that is related to security timing, and how can you achieve that timeline, in a way that you address risk too. So it's, I think that adds to the challenge, but it brings together, the whole, I would say, organization to figure out a way where you can move along as a culture or as an organization, the whole workflow, bringing all the expertise together to a similar goal, which is actually to avoid the breach or a loss, or being in a situation that your customers feel that they cannot trust you or they don't have a good experience.
But I think a lot of that's true, and I think. Well, I didn't mean to equivocate that, did you? I think you're absolutely true. I think it's also critical to all of us that are leading these efforts, whether as consultants or actually in leadership roles, to also come up with all the other reasons we should do this besides just fear of a breach, right? I know boards I've been involved with and CEOs I've been involved with, they're just exhausted by you have to fund this or there's a breach, and here's how much a breach is going to cost you. And that's no criticism of Curtis, of your comment earlier. It's just, I think that well is almost dry, right? Whether it was the latest scanning software we had to do, or the latest upgrade to Active Directory we had to do, or whatever the case may be, to come and say, now I need a significant investment, otherwise you're going to have a breach, which I know is an way oversimplification. But it's on us to come up with, this actually helps our overall agility. This actually helps on the revenue side. It's not just this potential big bad boogeyman of an expense side, which, look, all of that's real, right? A breach happening and all of that is absolutely real. But I think it's on us to really come up and present it in a different way of saying, this is how it can help, rather than this is just how it can avoid the bad thing.
And I'll just
I think that's a fair point. I'll just quickly comment and say that. I'll just say that that's a fair point.
There's a lot of echoing going on. Curtis, you want to try again?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a valid point raised by JT, and that actually that's where the DevSecOps as a combined sometimes teams or practice, or sometimes single job roles are really helping with that, because I agree that the well, I wouldn't say it's dry, actually. That's one thing I would disagree with. There always seems to be budget found, but it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to keep spending more and more money on security without being able to provide the benefits of agility as well, which is where I think we've seen a lot of automation come into the mix. There's no shortage of tools that will tell you how many vulnerability disclosures you have. And we're starting to see a lot more tools now helping organizations to triage and prioritize and to validate if that risk is something that teams need to prioritize time and effort and resource on. And I think that's where the CISO, from a risk point of view, can make real gains. There's always going to be a high level of security issues. They do have a responsibility to highlight the risk in terms of breach and the cost to the business, but the solution cannot just be layering on another security tool that discloses more issues. It's got to be able to provide agility and benefits over and beyond just kind of blocking and maybe slowing the organization down. It needs to work with the business and their practices, which are helping to drive innovation. And again, that's around prioritization, validation, triage and workflow, so that it works at the pace of development and not pushing against it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best things, the DORA report, right? Nicole Forsgren and Gene Kim, and I know they're both off doing things in the DORA community at Google, continues to keep driving it forward, but it really gave us those metrics and the ability to show, hey, this is why the business runs better if we take on this, and we just need to bring the security part into those kind of metrics and those kind of conversations.
Very true. I was actually going to mention that as well. I love how this conversation got going. It's like, first you got to understand what your current process is. Do a value stream mapping section and kind of lay it all out. Hey, we're part of a value stream management play. We're a layer on top of software delivery to basically put that in. So this is our story. Hey, understand what's there. The next step is understanding the buy-in and what leverage you have to get that buy-in. I know we've talked about agility. I know there's another customer of ours that we've talked to that what he promoted was the momentum away from doing a hardening phase to, look, it's all going to be built in the process. And so with that improved efficiency, we're going to get more stuff through the process. Mm-hmm. One of the other pieces to look at, in addition to the DORA metrics, are value stream flow metrics. The Value Stream Management Consortium, if you haven't seen that, go get involved, because it looks at some foundational metrics of software delivery. And where that relates is you can actually watch the improvement as you get rid of things like hardening phases and automate more and do things up front. You've got better efficiency because you've got reduced risk because you're not fixing, security issues late in the process, which oftentimes can be architectural in nature and include massive disruption to software delivery, and that just explodes your overall lead time and cycle time of a delivery and reduces your throughput. So there's some really interesting things to look at, but in addition to those DORA metrics, please look at the flow metrics and implementing those. One of the interesting aspects of the flow metrics is a metric that looks at distribution, which now is a forward-looking kind of thing. It's like, okay, we can look at the number of incidences or bugs related to particular pipelines, and we can correlate that to how much they've been investing. And when I say investing, I mean feature and quotes kind of work into pipelines. Well, gosh, this particular pipeline's having high level of incidences and they're not really investing in security. Wonder if that's a problem. Maybe there's a reallocation of investment needed in terms of time. And again, whether it's pipeline into the application itself or the infrastructure, it's all code, and all needs to get looked at. So let's work on these investments. The point is use the outputs of the metrics as a standard way to justify the investments that you're putting in, and that will help with the process overall.
Yeah, so we need to keep things moving. Great points, Jeffrey. As always, we've got a great question in that I want to go ahead and address before we move on to the technology part. The question is from Gaurav. He asks, should there be a distinction between CI and CD side of things when it comes to DevSecOps? And does one take precedence over the other?
So I think that on CI, you can use security testing just like unit tests. You don't have the context of the production environment that is going to be deployed on. And on CD, you have a materialized image if you're scanning Docker containers, or you have materialized environment if you're trying to test your Terraform plan with the production parameters that are going to be deployed. So in other words, CI has less production context than CD, and the tested features that you're testing on security, for example, if you have encryption over your data or have backup and recovery over it, might have different values on the CD environment than just testing on CI or testing locally.
I would also address the last part of it. Does one take precedence over the other? Unequivocally, no. Right? I mean, they both need to be done. They're both incredibly important to do, and so you need to make sure that you do both of them. They're just two separate phases, and too often I feel they are combined into a single phase. You're doing CI/CD. You're not doing CI and CD.
Exactly. You need to do both, and you need to do in every stage of your development life cycle, because what you catch in CI, it's in one realm, and what you catch in CD is unexpanded, as Barak mentioned. You have your templates, infrastructure as code that you check to, the configuration aspects that you need to check to. So you need to do both. Yeah.
As we work with our customers and our internal processes, the frame of inner loop and outer loop seems to have been even more effective than CI/CD as that differentiator. Because these days we're using a lot of deployment, even for just in the dev experience, right? We're to one of the hyperscalers or whatever the case may be. It's when I deploy out to that production world, right? That outer loop. That again, everything Barak and Daniela and Matt just said come into play. But we have found, rather than trying to draw a line between CI and CD, drawing a line between the inner loop and outer loop of the development experience helps frame up some of those controls and things a little differently.
Interesting. So
I would just say that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that we got an interesting comment from Vincenzo, who said his biggest roadblock is complex tool integrations. And I wonder, how much do you guys hear about that? Is that a major problem within organizations? And is that, do you think, the biggest thing perhaps that's hindering DevSecOps adoption?
So from my perspective, at least, most of these issues could be resolved by tool vendors agreeing, which is, I agreed, impossible. But if their integrations are often designed in a silo to where they solve one specific use case, and then they say, yes, we have an integration with tool X, but the problem is it doesn't actually encompass the entire process. So just because I have an integration to something doesn't mean that it's actually going to give me or my organization actual value. And it can be very complex to actually integrate to the point where it actually is truly providing value in my organization. And so I would agree that is something from a tool vendor perspective that needs to be addressed and looked at. And then, of course, you have the whole dynamic of organizational silos. It may not be really a complex integration from a technology perspective, but it's complex because of the organizational structures that I have to navigate in order to get that integration working.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think organizations change as well. So if you've got a web of integrations and one of those tools changes, makes an upgrade, it creates a certain element of brittleness to your overall fabric of what you're trying to achieve. However, I think with the API integrations that are out there now, it's a lot better than it was yesteryear. I think customers are definitely gravitating to tools. Certainly with the the advent of DevSecOps teams, they're looking for tools that can be deployed in development, CI, and operations domains that provide like a full stack coverage to get rid of these silos and unite their mission into one. But it's hard to find a tool that does it all. So that's where you will need a platform that does a lot of what you're trying to achieve, but will rely on some integrations. And integrations aren't a bad thing, because it means for customers, they don't put all of their eggs in one basket. But I can understand how it will be challenging for them to know where to get started and the complexity that goes with that. But I think a lot of improvements have been made.
Exactly. I would say APIs, but also open source and leveraging, native constructs. And that helps a lot to create a complete workflow. And one data source can feed many intelligence logic. So having integration with the tools that you have in place, it will improve your knowledge of what is going on. So I think it's getting better. And the more you have, I'm getting an echo. But the more you can look for solutions that can provide, the core of your workflow, is the better. The multiple tools creates overhead, creates also security gaps, knowledge gaps, because you need to translate from the policy language to even to the events, parsing data, trying to match everything or correlate everything in one timeline. So it is possible to have integration of an ecosystem, but it's important also to try to have a source of truth and see what the APIs can reach out to other solutions, but also leverage what is cloud native and natural constructs that are already there. Like I give you an example, like Kubernetes admission controls. You don't need to add any proxy or any other thing. You can just leverage that construct in the framework.
All right, great. So guys, we have about 8 minutes until the end of the webinar. So I want to jump over to kind of looking at some best practices or sage advice that you guys might be able to impart to our audience regarding ways that they can move beyond the roadblocks that they're experiencing. I'm seeing this great chat happening with Jesus asking about how in order to initiate the cultural change, what good practices do you recommend to measure maturity? And JT has so very generously chimed in on that, as well as Matt and Jeffrey now. So that's awesome stuff. But other best practices, guys. What do you guys? If you had to impart one piece of advice to our audience, what would that be with regards to overcoming the DevSecOps roadblocks? And Danielle, I want to start with you, and we'll just let folks go from there.
I think having a joint goal, shared kind of winning objective is important. So DevOps has measurable metrics and KPIs that we already discussed this. So, and bring this together with DevSecOps, lead time to delivery, how much better that gets, when you add security in the mix, MTTR, how much better you get into fixing or remediating or mitigating, issues that you're seeing in terms of, your code or your application. So I think bringing security team, operation team, development team, and the compliance team together to share goal I think they will help the organization to overcome the challenges that they face. Because when there is the will, there is the way. Yeah.
All
I
right.
would build on top of what Daniela said, and my biggest piece of advice, especially for senior leaders, is look at the incentives that are currently in place for that middle management layer, managers and directors. And do those incentives, whether it's their goals, their bonuses, whatever those are, how they're measured, do they align with where you want to go? Because if those are out of whack, that's going to make your cultural change so much harder. And I bring you that from a lesson learned, a post-mortem of an effort of this in the past.
All right. Great.
Jumping on with that, I love the measure conversation, you know, with the millions, if not billions, that have spent in tooling of different kinds, including security. So often we can't answer the most fundamental question of, did we make it better? Is it better? Measure. That's your starting point. Get a baseline and do better. It, Mixing in the goals that you're looking to accomplish. Don't forget, it's more than just the application itself. Include the infrastructure, include the pipeline. That's all.
All right.
Yeah, I'll just jump on and agree that you definitely, remove the silos and look at the full stack, and risk across the full stack. And we've seen that in the past where we've had, application security teams, and then it moves on to platform security teams, and then you've got different security teams, all with requirements on developers, which it goes back to that creation of friction. So I think security and DevOps aren't trying to get in one another's way. There has been a fundamental lack of understanding of the other team's goals. DevOps often lacks awareness about security issues and the impact of security vulnerabilities can have on an environment. So they may see security gatekeepers as simply a nuisance, when in fact unpatched vulnerabilities can be exploited and lead to devastating breaches. So, but there need to be common goals and alignment across those goals. And then I think the measurement is a key point as well, in that, I've seen a lot of CISOs and security leaders with their counterparts in engineering and development really work toward, how do we measure dwell time? What's our mean time to patch? How do we prioritize risk? How do we validate if a risk is actually exploitable in our organization? All of those things will help create agility, but also help in terms of measuring effectiveness of the investments.
I think that another thing that you can do is ask your engineers one simple question: are you proud in the software that you've built? And in a lot of cases, they will just pop up the most annoying thing, whether it is in productivity, security, architecture, and they know what they need to fix. And they just need your help as a leader to prioritize that over other tasks, or to make way to implement those.
That's a great point.
And the only thing I can add, I think, from all that's been said is start. Because all too often you listen to all of us here on the call, you read all the books, read everything you want, and then you get so overwhelmed with, oh, that's a lot of work. I'm not sure I can do that. But at the end of the day, it ain't going to happen unless you do something. So even if it's just automating a build or introducing code scanning as part of the CI process, anything progressive is better. Don't make it worse. Just make it a little bit better. And eventually you'll get there.
That's great. That's great. Actually, everything that you guys have said has been great and useful. So useful. So for organizations, that are even having minor issues with DevSecOps adoption. I mean, there's so many takeaways in today's discussion. I do appreciate everybody's expertise and sharing your expertise with the audience. We are 2 minutes to the top of the hour, so unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today's discussion. But again, guys, I do want to thank you all for joining me. Just a quick reminder that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity. We are going to be sending out an email after today's webinar that does contain a link to access the webinar on demand. So you will be getting that email, and you can always go to devops.com and find the webinar also on demand. Just go to devops.com/webinars and look in the on demand section. It should be right there waiting for you. Before we close things out, I did mention at the top of the hour we would be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Our winners today are Jack B. Congratulations, Jack. Cosmin S. Congratulations, Cosmin. Anushka S. Congratulations, Anushka. And finally, Molly P. Congratulations, Molly. Congratulations to all 4 of you. We will be sending or following up with you via email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. And if you don't see anything in your inbox, please check your spam folder. Another thank you to Daniela, JT, Matt, Jeff, Curtis, and Barack. What a great lineup. What just a wealth of information here and expertise. I do thank each and every one of you for spending today on the webinar with us and sharing your expertise. So thank you very, very much. I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.